This podcast represents the opinions of Tyler Barber and his guests to the show. This podcast is not intended to be a substitute for the medical advice of a licensed counselor or physician. The listener should consult with a mental health professional in any matters relating to their health or the health of a child. This is the Mayo Lab Podcast with Tyler Barber.
Welcome back, guys, to the Research Report. We're here today with Evan Rooney, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about what me and the students were talking about. So how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So could you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I am originally from upstate New York, and I've been working in the field of clinical psychology for about 10 years post-bac. I worked in a couple different post-college research labs in upstate New York and then also in Houston, Texas. And then I've been here at the University of Mississippi in the clinical psychology PhD program.
Yeah.
This is my 5th year.
Awesome. So what brought you to Ole Miss?
I was living in Houston while my wife was finishing her PhD degree. She got a job here, and I got into grad school here, and so we were able to be in the same place at the same time, which is not always easy to do in academia. So yeah, worked out.
That's awesome. That sounds very ideal.
Yeah.
So what kind of, influenced you to pursue psychology?
I don't know. I always, was interested in people, and sometimes in a positive and maybe less positive way, kind of like what makes people tick. Why they do the things that they do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, so were there any experiences that you had personally that influenced your, not just pushing for psychology, but perception of psychology?
I think that's a good question. I'm not really sure what made me gravitate towards psychology in the first place. I know that my dad had some experience with it. He had done a psychology degree for a brief period of time, so I kind of was interested into it initially because of that. And then, like I said, just kind of noticing that I liked working with people, talking with people. I was comfortable hearing about people's problems. And so that was something that initially made me interested in more of a clinical pathway, and that's what I thought I wanted to do for a long time in psychology, was more be a therapist, which I've gotten a little farther away from now. But yeah.
Cool. Well, that's awesome. So with the students that I was talking to earlier,
sure,
we talked about men's mental health and kind of how it affects men and how we deal with it. And so what are common misconceptions that you see in your work and in school with men's mental health?
Yeah, I think some of the misconceptions are the idea that it doesn't affect them, that men don't struggle with mental health concerns, that men, I think sometimes there's an idea of men don't feel this way, whether it's sad or anxious or these more traditionally feminized, internalized kind of emotions.
Yeah.
I think there's the misconception that men don't struggle with those things. And I think that there's some legitimate reasons why people perceive it that way, kind of cultural reasons, the way that men kind of get conditioned to show and talk about emotions.
Yeah.
But I think that's the biggest misconception, is that men aren't dealing with the same kind of set of emotions and difficulties that women or other people are.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I wholeheartedly agree too. So what would you say the most common challenges that men face are, and why do you think that they don't like to talk about them?
Yeah, I think the challenge is the kind of cultural invalidation of emotional experience that I think men get a lot. I think the way that men are socialized around emotions or mental health difficulties is often a more kind of externalizing or outward show of difficult emotions. So you commonly think of anger or frustration. Those are acceptable emotions that men can show, whereas this other broad, full range of emotional experience that includes sadness and anxiety, all those other pieces that kind of play into different mental health concerns.
Yeah.
Those things are less acceptable to show. So I think from a very young age, men get conditioned to hold those things in, quiet those things down, or just not talk about them, not display them publicly.
Yeah.
And so it's a lot more difficult to kind of tap into those things once you start having those issues manifest.
Definitely. I mean, we all grew up hearing "be a man."
Yeah.
That's the
Suck
most
it
common
up.
one. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Suck it up, be a man. How do you think that phrase affects men, and how do you think that it kind of weighs on their mental health, as they get older, at least?
Yeah, I think, I come back to that word of invalidation. I think really the idea that it's just kind of like undercuts their experience. Basically, you're taking away the legitimacy or taking away, disregarding their struggle.
Yeah.
And I think that can be profoundly difficult, especially, at a formative age where you're learning what emotions are, how to deal with them, how to understand them, how to even identify them in the first place. A lot of those really like fundamental, basic emotional regulation skills get undermined by that messaging.
Yeah.
And so I think when men go through puberty and have a lot more emotions that they're kind of contending with, and then have like the challenges of adulthood or kind of finding themselves in college or whatever, they start to kind of wrestle with some of those things a little bit more, but they don't necessarily have the skills to do so efficiently or effectively.
Gotcha. Well, to go along with that, how do you think that men could maybe express vulnerability while also like not feeling weak when they do it?
Yeah. I think that's a difficult question, because I think that a lot of these, a lot of that depends on the context that you're in, like the people that you're surrounding yourself with, the degree to which you feel comfortable being vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
I think that oftentimes social support, the idea of like being able to lean on people that you care about and kind of can feel comfortable with, is often something that research shows supports mental health across genders or any other category. But that can be really difficult when you have that pervasive and validating message of suck it up, be a man. If you have friends who are kind of giving you that feedback as well, then reaching out in those ways can be really, really difficult. But I would say that like finding people that you feel comfortable being yourself with, finding people who you feel like can kind of meet you where you're at and be able to support you, and testing the waters of that vulnerability, really finding a way to whatever way feels comfortable to you to start that process of showing a little bit more of yourself and some of the things that maybe you're struggling with that aren't necessarily easy to talk about. I think kind of pushing against some of that discomfort and trying to break down some of those barriers, because the reality is, we're talking about this, men deal with this stuff. It's not as much as you want to brush it under the rug or pretend like it's not something that men have to deal with to be successful. That's not the reality that we're living in. So when you reach out to other people and you look for that support, you might be surprised that they're also going through other things. They might actually be able to kind of like identify with you or validate your experience in ways that you might not typically expect.
That was really well worded. So I got another question for you.
Sure.
This season we've been kind of every once in a while bringing up social media and just talking about how that plays a part in whatever the topic is that we're discussing.
Yeah.
How would you say that social media positively or negatively affects mental health in men and maybe the future of it? Like, how do you see it going?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think young men today have a particularly difficult time navigating a lot of this stuff. I think I look to one of the paragons of American masculinity, Teddy Roosevelt. It's been attributed to him, at least, to the quote of "comparison is the thief of joy." I think that is very true with the social media. I think looking around and seeing whether it's like, a more desirable body type or, a more beautiful woman or partner that this person's with, or whether you have material things or not, like all of those points of comparison that come up in social media, I think can make men judge themselves and have that kind of like self-putting down process that comes in, because you don't have what this other person has. That comparison really does dampen your ability to feel comfortable with yourself and what you do have. And so I think that social media provides a, unfortunately, bad kind of nesting ground for a lot of those beliefs or kind of those thoughts about yourself and what you're doing in your own life.
Yeah,
I don't know if that makes sense. But
no, it makes perfect sense. I think that, I don't know if it's inherent or if it's just the way that we're raised, but I think that men a lot of the time have this thought that they need to be Superman.
Yeah.
That's actually what we talked about and with the students too, is because we said that you need to, or you're supposed to look like Superman, but when you go home, you're Clark Kent. You're just a guy. And so I got a question for you about that, though. How do you think that men could maybe cope with the inherent, or whatever the thought is, about being Superman? How can they cope with not being Superman?
Yeah.
And also, how can they cope with, say that they're trying to reach out to people and be vulnerable? How can they cope with maybe, like, while they're just starting that? Like, how could they feel better, I guess?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think that, the flip side of that comparison is the thief of joy, is this idea that is popularized in a lot of like modern mental health treatments, the idea of values-focused living. So living your life in a way that is consistent with like your own underlying values, the things that you care about, the kind of person that you want to be, these kind of guiding lights that we kind of have for ourselves. That's a really difficult process to tap into, because a lot of times, you have external values as well, things that other people have care about that you've kind of internalized and made your own. So this idea that like you're supposed to do X, Y, and Z, those are kind of more external values. Whereas you can have your own self-generated, these are the things I care about. This is the kind of person I want to be.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things, I think, are the remedy for a lot of that comparison, because you're only beholden to yourself. They're your values. They're the things that you care about. You can always come back to those things. And you can only really make positive progress towards those things, right? Like if you're acting or behaving in a way that's not consistent with your values, you can learn from that mistake. That tells you something. There's a lesson that can be learned there for you to kind of reorganize the way that you're living your life to be more in tune with the things that you care about. When you start prioritizing the shoulds and the what ifs and the what does somebody else have and why don't I have that, if those are the foremost thoughts in your mind, you're always living your life in service of something else, whether it's an external idea or an external person. And that tamps down your ability to, I guess, be comfortable with yourself, and then also to find your own way forward.
Definitely.
Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, just to be happy with yourself. If you have internal sets of values that you meet, and you meet those criteria, and you're living according to you, then you'll just be happy.
Yeah, so
overall.
I think, this idea of the Superman, I think you have to be your own Superman. You have to define what that looks like for yourself and things that you actually care about for yourself. Not everybody's Superman's the same. They don't all look the same. And that's a pretty unrealistic expectation based on everybody's different backgrounds and lived experiences. Like, we can't all be the same, archetype of masculinity. It just doesn't make sense. So finding what that looks like for you. And I think that, there's been an interesting conversation in our culture about like toxic masculinity and some of the flip sides of that. There are some really, really positive masculine values of like loyalty and, wanting to protect people who are, less fortunate or weaker than yourself.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really beautiful and powerful things that could come out of uniquely masculine traits or traits that have been ascribed to masculinity.
Yeah.
But I think we often gravitate towards more of this like showy alpha kind of version of masculinity that really, it feels like it's a shortcut, right? Like it's like you can look like the alpha man, but are you actually living like the alpha man? Are you actually living in your life in a way that's consistent with what you care about? And also, what's actually important for society, what's actually important for helping others.
Definitely. I think that recently, maybe it's not recent. I may have just gotten to the age where I'm starting to see it. But so stoicism is like a big deal with a lot of men now. But I think that the problem with stoicism, and it's not really stoicism that I have a problem with. I think that there's a misconception about it where to be stoic, you have to let everybody else know that you're stoic. And it's like that's very counterproductive. I feel like that's very different than actually being and like if you wanted to be that, then being stoic. I think it's very different.
Yeah, I'm not overly familiar with the philosophical orientation of Stoicism, but I think that speaks to this idea of values, right? Probably an accomplished Stoic would be somebody who is not necessarily telling everybody that they're a Stoic, and somebody who is very comfortable with themselves and the way that they're living.
Yeah.
So
I agree. I got another question for you.
Sure.
So therapy. Do you think that should be normalized for men?
Yeah, that's a tricky question to ask a clinical psychologist. I think that there's a lot of, or a clinical psychologist in training. I think that there's a lot of different schools of thought around this. I think in general, a lot of people can benefit from having a confidant, right? Having somebody who is a kind of impartial and unbiased person to be able to vent your feelings to, or kind of talk through or process the stuff that you're going through.
Yeah.
Kind of in relation to your question earlier about how can men start that process of being vulnerable, I think having somebody like a counselor or somebody who exists outside of your social circle who is specifically designed to be a non-judgmental force.
Yeah, there's not a risk for you to.
There's no risk. There's zero risk. The only risk is how much money you're spending on going to therapy. So, yeah, I think that can be really generally beneficial. I will say that like more kind of intensive evidence-based psychological therapies are usually reserved for people who are going through really profound difficulties and who really need a very targeted approach to kind of deal with the stuff that they're dealing with, because it's interfering with their life to such a degree that they really need help.
Yeah.
So there's some that's not really relevant, to be honest. That's kind of two different schools of thought around therapy. But I think in general men can benefit from those things, and I think that there is I think that some of the discrepancy that you see in terms of like rates of mental health difficulties between men and women is a lot of times men just don't show up for therapy or show up for services, particularly for internalizing things that are kind of less culturally acceptable for them to be struggling with.
Yeah.
So I think that there is definitely some stigma and some pressure kind of against therapy for men, but obviously everybody can benefit from those things.
Yeah. I think it could be difficult, at least I'm speaking for me.
Sure.
But I know if I needed to go to therapy, I would feel scared. I would feel afraid to put myself out there, because it's like a different form of putting yourself out there.
Absolutely. And kind of like what we've been talking about, like it's not typical, right? You're not accustomed to that kind of disclosure or that level of vulnerability. And I've seen this in practice with men that I've worked with clinically, is it does take a little bit of time to kind of warm up to be able to share things that are really close to your chest, or really be able to kind of delve into some of the more like emotionally focused work. And I think sometimes that you see that there's just like a gap of understanding. Like I've worked with some men, and it just takes like a longer time for them to get a good idea of like how to just identify emotions in the first place, because they've spent a lot of time ignoring those things.
Yeah.
But to your question of like, do I think men should go to therapy? I was like, if they have a problem that they need help with, why would you not take advantage of a resource, right? I think that there's something that comes up in therapy, not just with men, but with a lot of people, is the idea of like weakness, that I'm weak for needing to seek support around this, that I'm weak for having this problem in the first place, and that it's so bad, or that I couldn't deal with it on my own, that I need to ask somebody else for help. That idea of asking for help as weak. And I can't disagree with that more. I think it's profoundly difficult to be able to put yourself out there.
Yeah.
I think it takes a lot of courage and a lot of strength to go against the grain, to do something different, to take responsibility for your own stuff and do something about it. Those are all things that are really difficult to do. And I don't really understand how you could be weak for doing something difficult.
Yeah. No, that's a great way to say it. I mean, it's at the surface, people could perceive and do perceive that as weak, but if you look a little bit deeper, it takes a lot to go.
It does.
It takes a big step.
Yeah.
I think leap.
Yeah, I think that some of this, I kind of say this a lot in therapy, is like when you're kind of getting the sensation that something is uncomfortable, or you're feeling like there's this big kind of internal pushback, that's a red flag for you, that you actually kind of need to pay a little bit more attention to that instead of turning your back and walking away from that. That feeling. It's like, maybe I need to look at this a little bit more closely because I'm having such a strong response to this. Why am I having such a strong response to this? Why do I feel like this is threatening to do something that's ultimately for my own benefit, you know?
Yeah, definitely. That's actually, I tell my family members, and I tell, anybody that I'm close to about, I just say, be comfortable being uncomfortable. Because it's always when you're uncomfortable that you're growing. Like, that's when the growth happens.
100%.
Whether it's with therapy or whether it's, in a career. Like, if you're uncomfortable public speaking, you might want to public speak some more, then you'll get pretty good at it.
Yes. And there's tons of male-directed euphemisms for that, too, of, practice makes perfect and 10,000 hours, like all of these sports analogies that often get used as a way of like socializing men. It's like, why don't we use that for emotional stuff as well? The same processes are at play. It's just that this is more taboo to talk about with men, or this is not something that we want to it's been emphasized or addressed with men yet.
Yeah, I agree. So I kind of want to shift it a little bit.
Sure.
How do you think that physical exercise and just being fit, like going into fitness, affects the mental health of men? How do you think it helps?
Yeah, how do I think it helps? I think that there is a lot of research to support the effectiveness of physical exercise as a treatment or like a kind of therapeutic factor for depression in particular. There's a lot of benefits from like the endorphins that get released, a lot of like biological benefits. I think there's also it plays well into the ideas of behavioral activation, which is like a school of treatment, particularly for depression. This idea of kind of like creating mastery with something, showing yourself that you're good at something, showing yourself that you have a skill and that you're gaining that skill over time. That's very inherent in working out, especially like weight training or even cardio as well, being able to kind of run faster and farther with, in the same amount of time.
Yeah.
So that progression can kind of show you that you're gaining something, right, and kind of build more confidence, and so that can help with feelings of depression and things like that. So I think that there are a lot of positives in terms of physical activity for dealing with mental health, and I think that's a really, really positive outlet, and one that is a lot closer to our cultural understanding of like how a man's supposed to act and be, right? Like
kind of fits the
mold.
Narrative,
it fits the mold in a healthy way, because there's also a lot of unhealthy ways that men cope and that are kind of typically masculine behavior. Like I'm thinking of like drinking or something like that. So exercise is really, really helpful and can be a big positive.
Yeah.
I think there are some caveats to that, though, more so with the kind of culture that's built up around like gym culture, or I think that there can be some spaces of toxic masculinity in those areas as well. So again, I think it's about context and the kind of people that you're surrounded with, but in and of itself, physical activity is a great way to try to cope with stress, anxiety. Oftentimes when I'm struggling with stress and anxiety, and I've talked to other people who feel the same way, it's like you have like all this energy built up inside you. It's like you're just buzzing, and and so the idea of just like kind of expelling some of that in a very healthy way, like through exercise, can be really, really helpful. And I think you have that physical sensational benefit of just kind of the release, the catharsis of doing something with all that energy, that pent up energy. And then there's all the kind of like biological stuff that comes along with that, and the behavioral stuff that comes along with that.
Yeah, and I agree also on the caveat thing, because there can be a lot of it's just like it's a mentality you gotta kind of have going into it, because a lot of people expect instant results, and they can kind of feel let down from that. And then comparison, that also comes, that's a big one when it comes to the gym. Like a lot of people are scared to go to the gym, like to even start, because they don't want to walk in and see this is like the media version of like a 6'4" Chad, it just swole, and, like people they compare and they feel bad.
100%. And I'll be honest that like I'm not always comfortable in those spaces because of those reasons. Like, I know I'm like, oh man, I'm never going to be able to lift as much as that dude, or like, I haven't lifted since I was in college. I don't really know what I'm doing here. Are people going to like laugh at me or whatever? Like, there's all of that kind of like self-judgment, that comparison that does come into play in some of those spaces. Yeah. So I think, but again, that's more of a commentary on like culture and how people approach that, as opposed to the physical activity itself. Physical activity, great.
Yes, exactly.
The ways that gets played out, or the culture in which that gets played out in, can sometimes be detrimental. But
I agree. So my next question for you has got to be, so have you noticed like a shift in how society views mental health, like versus like maybe back in the 80s or like however long ago, and then now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that's been encouraging around younger generations, is that there's a lot more acceptance of mental health language, emotional language, acceptability of mental health treatment in general. Like, I think that a lot of those things have increased with the younger generations. I think they're a lot more comfortable thinking and talking about these things. Yeah, I think that's been really great. It's something that I've noticed with my nephew, who's like 14 or 15 right now, and he's able to talk about emotional things, mental health things, to a degree that's better than some of his like male relatives who are older, who have a longer life experience and everything. But he's just kind of more tapped into those thoughts because it's more acceptable. So I think that there is a lot of growth in that area. Yeah, I do think that social media can be concerning, and that's kind of like that's a different edge of things that the younger generations are dealing with. And I think that a lot of men right now through social media are getting pulled into this kind of weird manosphere, toxic masculinity thing that's doubling down on this idea of, you're devoid of emotion, and you don't, shut those parts of yourself down and focus on these kind of outward shows of dominance or whatever.
I agree. I definitely agree. And so, like, to wrap things up, I guess my last question for you would be, since we just talked about how society is improving regarding mental health, what changes would you like to be seen, or would you like to be made, I guess, in like moving forward?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. That's something that I think about a lot as somebody who practices in clinical psychology and does clinical psychology research, is kind of like, well, what do we do with this stuff? We have these findings, we have this research, like how do we translate it into something that actually is beneficial for people? We know that evidence-based therapies are beneficial for people based on research, but the research has limitations. It's, people drop out of those studies. So it didn't work for everybody because some people didn't complete the treatment. Or, when we're talking about the evidence to support different treatments, it's the majority of cases got better, or the majority of cases saw symptom reduction, but that's like 60%. So what about that other 40%, right? So we still have room to grow as a field in terms of intervention. And it's been interesting to go to conferences and see researchers talk, but also like people from the community or like youth themselves talk about difficulties with mental health. And a lot of times people, whether it's because of social pressures or the stigma that we were talking about before, they're not always comfortable with the idea of like individual psychotherapy, or the idea of sitting down with somebody and talking through the feelings, or just sitting down in a group and talking through feelings. I think that format for intervention isn't necessarily for everybody. It's also not accessible to everybody. Not everybody has the time, resources, or financial resources to be able to use those services. Yeah. So I'd like to see a lot more kind of proactive or preventative mental health measures. Like, I would love to see all children in school learn about emotion and emotion regulation. And like, why don't we have classes on that built into curriculum? We have classes on math and reading, and when you're in your senior year of high school, like, politics, or kind of like how to be a good citizen. Like, we cover some of those bases, or we cover some bases in school, but we leave out this entire education of like how to be a a healthy and confident person.
Yeah.
How to be a emotionally successful person.
Definitely. How to win the battle with yourself.
Yeah,
Because a lot of people.
everybody has that, and to a different degree. Not everybody has mental health struggles or fights those same kind of fights, but the incidence rates, lifetime incidence rates for things like depression and anxiety are like 60 or 70%. Don't quote me on the numbers, but they're high. A lot of people go through those things at one point in their life.
Yeah.
Those are struggles that most people will have at one point or another.
Yeah.
So why don't we have more education around those things? We have lots of good information. We have lots of decades of research on healthy and adaptive ways of dealing with emotional problems, but that's not getting disseminated to people, especially at a formative time like when you're in school. So that's something that I would like to see more of, and I know that there are some programs like that exist, but it would be interesting to see it implemented.
Like a nationwide.
Something that's a lot more standardized and kind of built in.
Definitely.
Because I think that takes a lot of the pressure off people having to do things for themselves, and it also takes a lot of that like financial pressure off because it's for everybody. Everybody's getting those kind of tier 1 services of
Definitely.
This is how you can kind of deal with things when you're having a hard time. So
yeah, well, that's a great answer. That would be awesome to see. I guess thank you very much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you so much.
Really
for having
enjoyed
me.
the conversation. Thank you guys for listening to the Mayo Lab podcast. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok. Until next time, keep the conversation going. Thank you so much for listening to the Mayo Lab podcast. We appreciate you spending time with us and being a part of the conversation. I'm Tyler Barber, and if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and share with a friend. Until next time, keep the conversation going.